It's brought to you by the National Referral Network. This is where we talk to professionals. They share their insights for the benefit of all of you and everyone listening, for everyone's benefit, yada, 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 as I always say. If you like what you hear today, hit the like and subscribe button. If you are a business owner today and you want to know how in the heck can I tap the Hispanic market, well, you're in luck, because our guest today is Hugo Gomez, and Hugo is the founder of the Hispanic Marketing Network, a marketing organization. I just want to make sure I get that right. I
Yeah, it's HispanicMarketing.com.
HispanicMarketing.com. Yes. You just told me that, and I just flubbed it. But hey, what are you going to do? But specifically, Hugo runs a marketing organization that is focused on the Hispanic marketplace. Hugo, I think that's a marketplace that is, for so many people, it's just so untapped. Why is that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thanks for having me on, Mike. There's so many reasons. I think one, it's more out of convenience. For most organizations, whether you're a Fortune 100 company or you're a small business on Main Street, the reality is if you can't speak Spanish, then it's not convenient for you to advertise in Spanish.
Okay.
So I just think it's fundamentally more about that. And there's plenty of business to go around with, let's call it the general market, the English speaking market. So when folks come to us, it's because they're trying to scale. And so that's when they tap into this incremental market.
So what about those that think, I don't speak Spanish. I don't think this is an area that I should venture off into. That's largely false, isn't it?
It is. It's also dependent geographically. So there are 10 states in the United States that make up 80% of the Hispanic population. So it's classic Pareto principle. So it's California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, Jersey, New York, Illinois. I'm sure I'm missing a couple other ones, but they largely make up the Hispanic population. So it would only make sense if you are in a state that has such a population density of Hispanics. But let's if you're in Idaho, it doesn't really make that much sense unless you really want to niche down for whatever advantage you have in the Hispanic market.
Okay. But so so geographical advantages have to be there, I think. How difficult, but I want to go back to the language barrier. How difficult is it to bridge that gap? Is it as difficult as people think?
It can be, yeah. It depends on the scale of why you want to engage with the Hispanic community. So I'll give you a couple examples.
Sure.
We work with a lot of attorneys who are having a difficult challenge in getting more, let's call it workers' comp or labor law cases. And naturally, it's very competitive in the general English market because many folks know how to advertise in these markets.
Mm-hmm.
And many law firms are just looking for an additional 5 to 10 cases a month. And by design, it's pretty easy to run a few ads for that kind of incremental growth. But then when you're talking about like McDonald's, for instance, and McDonald's wants to tap into, let's call it the bilingual Hispanic between 24 and 36, like that's a totally different challenge because it's going to require not just translation work, but it's going to require market research. It's going to require pretty surgical advertising placements.
Okay.
So I think the difficulty is going to be, it's a contingent on how much you want to scale through the market.
Okay. And what are so initially when you take on a new client and they're trying to tap this marketplace, I would imagine you're kind of coaching them at the beginning on what the optimal approaches are. Walk me through what that might look like.
The first question is why, right? It's why is this important to you to tap into this market? So this market is 20% of the United States. In the next decade, it's going to be about 25% of the United States. And that doesn't account for, the really kind of fuzzy data around undocumented persons in the United States.
Yeah.
So I always ask why. And the reasons vary. It's more of a financial reason. They know they've already reverse engineered the market opportunity. Others are more altruistic. They just see more Hispanics in their community. Thus, they just want to be more accessible, and they can't quantify it, but they just want to do it. And so we start with the why, and ultimately I like to start with the answer. In their case, or the end point. It could be a financial goal, it could be a market penetration goal, and then work backwards on the services that they need to reach out to that Hispanic market.
So, in other words, let's say you're working with a law firm in Texas, let's say, and they are not tapping this market yet, but they want to.
Right.
You would ask them, okay, what do you want to get out of this? What is your goal? And you might isolate it down to how, X number of cases or other specifics, I would imagine. Is that correct?
Yeah, patients, cases, customers, revenue. We work backwards from there and say, okay, well, if you're already seeing some success in the general market, let's call it in greater Dallas-Fort Worth, let's see how many Hispanics there are in the 100-mile radius. Let's quantify how many of those are potential clients or customers on an annual basis and see what can we capture over 6 months or a year or a multi-year agreement. But yeah, we always like to start with that endpoint, because if we can agree upon what success looks like, what that end goal looks like, then it makes all the subsequent work much easier to put together.
Okay, so they have to start out. So you begin with the end in mind, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make sense for us to put proposals together. They're pretty laborious, to take a lot of time to put ideas together and these concepts, unless we know what that end goal looks like.
What are some of the broader differences when it comes to marketing to the Hispanic community versus other communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the general market, you can work with cultural trends. You can work with just the general state of the general state and temperament of the country as it is in the general market. That generally works. But within the Hispanic community, it's very values focused. It's very family focused. It's oftentimes in certain markets pretty conservative.
Right.
And so we generally lean on what works on the averages. But I have to put an asterisk on that, because the Hispanic community is not a monolith. It is super diverse. And the more extreme examples I have are, advertising in California, which is largely densely Mexican American immigrants.
Right.
Is very different than marketing to South Florida, which is made of, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans. And the values that are inherited in these immigrant communities come by way of how they came into the country, what is the socioeconomic outlook for them currently in the future, also what is the diplomatic relationship between their origin country and the United States. So all those things have an impact on how we market a company's message to these cohorts. So I had to put the asterisk there that yes, there are some unifying values, but they are overwhelmingly different across the country.
So the one thing that unites those different groups would be the language, but it's beyond that. It's as diverse as any. It's not monolithic as you say.
Yeah, it's way beyond translations, right? Like translations are I would call them convenient or effective. Rather, they're convenient, but they're not effective.
Yeah. So is this what people generally get wrong about the Hispanic market?
Yes, this is the biggest mistake most organizations make, and this is from the largest organizations in the country to Main Street SMBs. They assume that this is like a language barrier, when in fact, depending on the market, it's a connection barrier, it's a trust barrier, it's an authority and credibility barrier.
Right. And what are some of the keys to building trust in this marketplace?
I like to think more tactically to answer that question. This is a market. There are a lot of media studies about how Hispanics consume media. And again, that's what the asterisk that it's not a monolith, but there are some commonalities across the country. And regardless of age and ethnicity and country of origin, Hispanics are more likely to use their mobile phone as their primary internet device. So tactically, I like to just go where the market is. It's on their phones, and it's at a higher rate than the general market.
Really?
Yes, it's at a higher. There's a famous Pew Research study that says 94% of Hispanics prefer using their phone for primary internet access over 83% of the general market.
Okay.
It's significant.
And do you think that's something that's misunderstood?
Yeah, I think there's a bias, a misunderstood bias that immigrant communities aren't digitally savvy, and the data points otherwise. And our speculation is that if you come to the country with limited resources, you may not have a desktop job or a white collar job, but you definitely have a cell phone. So I
Right.
think the cell phone has kind of flattened access to the internet and just knowledge. And so I think that that's deeply misunderstood amongst all verticals. Most executives we talk to are certainly surprised to hear this.
Right.
So our strategy tactically to connect to the community is to talk to them through mobile devices.
Do you think there is a general understanding, erroneously so, that the Hispanic community is perhaps, say, less affluent or has limited resources, or some of the things you mentioned? Is that a false perception?
Yes and no, because there's been multiple generations of Hispanics throughout the United States, especially in the last 120 years, more or less. But the averages suggest that it's lower in net worth, lower in annual income, less likelihood of owning home or property or having diverse assets. So that's what the averages show. But it is certainly changing, and I can see that with like the increase of demand with estate law and probate law attorneys asking to talk to this community more. So that signals to me that we are in a multi-generation kind of transition, where there's transition of assets that previously weren't there because of said, immigrant conditions, lower income, et cetera. I think that the tide is changing there. And you see that with the numbers. The U.S. Census not only showed that 20% of the United States is Hispanic, but they showed in the last year that 90% of that growth in the last decade was exclusively from the Hispanic community.
Yeah, you mentioned estate and probate law. I mean, obviously, our business is wealth management, and I have encountered this many, many times, where you're seeing this sort of generational shift, where it might be that, say, grandpa who came to this country way back when kind of does things in the old school way, but his kids aren't, and his sons and daughters' kids are not, and you're seeing these generational changes. And you're also seeing that there's a great deal of wealth in places where you wouldn't otherwise expect to see it. It's kind of flying underneath the radar. I think this old school character that I described, they are not given to displays of wealth. They're not putting it out there for the world to see, but it doesn't mean they don't have it.
Right, and I think that's one of the values. I think that's my speculation is that immigrants, regardless of country of origin, generally lay low, and I think that's inherited amongst generations. But again, that's a trend. I don't see that as like the holistic mindset of Hispanic immigrants. I certainly see that changing with folks who are born in the United States, or folks like myself who are born out of the country but have lived virtually their entire lives in the United States, having a completely different like viewpoint than that. But yes, there's substantial amounts of wealth in the Hispanic community. It's got the biggest buying power, several trillions of dollars in buying power over the next decade. And I think organizations of all sizes are taking note. And I think the election a couple of weeks ago is proof that this isn't a monolithic market. There's definitely segments of the market that think differently politically. So and it moved the needle. It moved the needle in favor of Trump. And I think that's something that we just can't ignore. No one can ignore that.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Well, listen, as we kind of wrap up here, what else do business owners that want to maybe market here, approach ingratiate themselves to the Hispanic community, what do they need to know?
A few things. So first is look locally. Like, what is the general makeup of the Hispanic community in your market? Is it largely Dominican? Is it Ecuadorian? El Salvador. Like just get a sense of what's happening in your community. Then find out if anyone on your team is part of this community and talk to them to get a little more intimate knowledge about how this community thinks in terms of like engaging with your business. And then more tactically, it's if you're serious about speaking to the community, you can certainly go mobile. This is also a very video focused market. This market loves video streaming services more than the general market. And lastly, this market really trusts what they read on social media. So, marketing 101 is be where the market is. Hispanics are largely on their phones watching videos on social media. So if you pair that with, even a surface level understanding of your local Hispanic market, you're already ahead of 99% of organizations across the country.
Okay. And your firm specializes, you mentioned attorneys a lot. Is that your primary specialty? And if it is, why should an attorney come to you to tap this marketplace?
Yeah, it's a super underrepresented market. Just by staffing alone in the United States, only 2% of all attorneys are Spanish speaking or Hispanic.
Yeah.
So that's a very low number, which suggests that the majority of the working force in the legal community are not advertising to Hispanics. So I think there's just a massive market potential. When there's less competition, the unit economics are in your favor. Your cost per call goes down. Your cost per case goes down. And that's comparative to your English or general market. So there are economic advantages until it gets competitive. And just in general, it's where the market's going. It's where the country's going. Like I mentioned earlier, in 10 years, it'll be 1 out of 4 persons in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're 100% right. You're right about everything. We certainly did see that during the election. Hispanics had more influence in the outcome than they maybe have ever had.
I think so, and I don't think that's changing.
No, it seems to be. We've known about this in California for a few decades now. That this was. I think Hispanics are now in the majority in California, if I'm not mistaken. And you're right also about the number of Spanish-speaking attorneys being surprisingly low. I mean, like really low. It's just it's almost to the point where it's a real head scratcher given where I live and where you live. Anything else that you want to add before we kind of close? Is there anything else that anybody needs to know? And when they approach you, they obviously want to have their ducks in a row, know what they want, and your job is to help them tap this marketplace, but to do it thoughtfully and I guess to a lesser extent surgically.
Yeah, I think just document the why. If there's a need or a want to grow with this incremental market, just write it down. It's that there's that adage where a problem written down is half solved. I think if you're trying to figure something out with regards to incremental growth, just write down why you want to be in this market, why it makes sense for you to kind of invest resources here, and everything else just works backwards from there. Whether it's with us or any competent marketing organization, they should be able to work with your why.
Okay. And anybody who has formulating their why, what they should do is go to HispanicMarketing.com to find out more information about how to approach this, how to work with you, and how you can tap this very big, giant, untapped marketplace.
Yeah, it's huge. It's massive.
Okay. All right. Well, if you again, hit the like and subscribe button. We'll be back here next week. Hugo, I can't thank you enough. This is great. By the way, we've never talked with anybody about this. Really, really appreciate your comments, and thanks everybody. We'll see you all next week.
Thanks, Michael.